When the average person thinks of Viking culture today, their mind immediately goes to fierce warriors, fearsome monsters, and intrepid explorers. But during the Viking Age, death was simply another adventure for these fearless people. And when they died, not everyone went to Valhalla. Some souls traveled to strange, forgotten realms, places of mystery, danger, and the supernatural. From haunted fields to shores filled with corpses, here are 5 Viking afterlives that are stranger than Valhalla. Number 5. Helheim, the realm of the dead. Hel is a big part of Norse mythology. In fact, her name is even used as a synonym for death itself. So it's no surprise that the Vikings believed she had a realm of her own in the afterlife. In fact, the myths describe 2 different locations that were associated with Hel. The first one is called Elifsgard. It was ruled over by the goddess Hel, but only housed those who had died from illness or old age. Valiantly slain warriors would not end up here, nor would they end up in the second version of Hel, which was called Helheim. This realm was the destination for all those who died in battle. It was ruled over by Hel's brother, Vergelmir, and was located deep within the earth. For anyone who ended up here, there was no escape. The walls of the realm were made of impenetrable ice, and the whole place was guarded by a pair of nasty serpents. But although Helheim sounds like a pretty terrible place to spend eternity, it wasn't as bad as some other destinations in Norse mythology. That's because the realm was more like a holding area than an eternal resting place. Those who died in battle would have to stay in Helheim until the next Ragnarok, at which point they would get to be reborn into the world again. Number 4, Folkvangr, Freya's Field of the Fallen. Freya was one of the most powerful goddesses in Norse mythology. She was associated with love, beauty, and magic. And when she died, she went to a very special place called Folkvangr, also known as the Field of the Fallen. The myths describe it as a giant meadow that was located in the far north where a select few warriors could be found feasting with Freya. The goddess had a particular fondness for those who died in battle, and every day she sent some of her servants out to scout the mortal plane for new recruits. Any warrior who was killed in battle would have the opportunity to be brought to Folkvangr if they accepted Freya's invitation. But it wasn't exactly a paradise. There was a reason why Freya's hall was only open to warriors who died in battle. That's because the goddess liked to keep her own army of elite fighters close by, just in case she needed them for any particular projects. So while the warriors who came to Folkvangr might have thought they were in for an easy afterlife, they were actually joining an elite military force. They would train with weapons and armor, practicing for some great battle they would inevitably fight in the future. To top it all off, Freya was a bit of a tyrant and didn't really care about the comfort of her guests. Her halls were described as being dimly lit and freezing cold. And even though there was plenty of food and drink, it was often stale. There were, however, some perks to living in such a gloomy place. After all, you were spending your afterlife hanging out with some of the best fighters in all of existence, and you had a front row seat for any interesting events that happened in the wider Norse cosmos. Number 3, Nastrund, the Shore of Corpses. Nastrund was probably one of the worst places a Viking could go when he died. It was a desolate shore located at the edge of the ocean, and its main feature was a large number of corpses washing up on its beaches. Why? Well, that's because Nastrund was located at the mouth of the Styx, which was the river that flowed through Hel's domain. Whenever a soul arrived in Hel, their body would be dumped into the Styx and sent floating out to sea. The corpses would then wash up on the shores of Nastrond, which was a grim sight to behold. But the shore itself wasn't the truly terrifying part. You see, when the bodies washed ashore, they weren't dead yet. They would simply be in a state of limbo until the next full moon, at which point they would reanimate and rise as Draugr. Now, unlike the undead hordes found in modern fiction, these Nordic zombies weren't mindless killing machines. They retained their intelligence, memories, and personalities, but they were now incredibly dangerous because they had no qualms about murdering anyone who entered their territory. The only way to defeat a draugr was to burn the corpse that created it, which was easier said than done. They lived for many years and were extremely protective of their own personal space. So it was exceptionally rare for anyone to make it to a dragon's lair without being killed. That's why Nastron was such a terrible place to end up in the afterlife. A Viking could die in battle, get thrown into the Styx, and then end up spending the rest of eternity having to fend off ravenous zombies. No, 2, Andlang, the hidden realm. The word Andlang means hidden path in Old Norse, and that's a very fitting description for this mysterious afterlife realm. Very little is known about Andlang today because the Vikings themselves didn't have much to say about it. Most of what we know comes from a single 13th century manuscript called the Harleian Codex, and even that doesn't contain much information. What we do know is that Andlang was considered to be a kind of paradise in the afterlife. It was inhabited by a small group of elite warriors who had been handpicked by Odin himself. These men were considered to be the luckiest of the lucky, since they got to spend eternity in a place filled with plenty of food and drink and plenty of opportunities for hunting. Andlang was surrounded by a thick fog that prevented anyone from finding it. This meant that only the chosen warriors could enter. And once they did, they were free to roam around a massive hall that contained everything they could ever want. Andlang was also apparently home to a large number of Valkyries, and they seemed to be on good terms with the warriors who lived there. Unlike Folkvanger, there was no tension between the servants of Odin and the Einherjar, and that's likely why Andlang was seen as a kind of elite Valhalla. You had all the fun of living in a warrior's paradise, but none of the drudgery that came with being part of Odin's army. Number 1. Lifjaberg, the Healing Mountain. Lifjaberg translates roughly to Healing Mountain, and that's a very appropriate name for this mysterious afterlife realm. As its name suggests, Lifbjerg was a place where a Viking could go to recover from injuries or illnesses they sustained in life. This afterlife was basically a hospital for the Norse pantheon, and it was ruled over by a female deity named Clint by the Snorri Sturluson, author of the Prose Edda. Clint was a member of the Vanir, a group of gods that was closely associated with fertility, growth, and healing. So it makes sense that she was placed in charge of the afterlife spa. What's interesting about Lifjaberg is that it seems to have been a completely separate realm from the 9 worlds of Norse mythology. It was supposedly accessible only through a cave located in a mountain on Earth, and only those who knew the secret password could find it. Once inside, however, visitors would have found a beautiful place filled with crystal-clear streams, lush green grass, and friendly animals. It was perfect for anyone who wanted to relax and recuperate, and it was staffed by a team of Valkyries whose sole job was to pamper the guests. All in all, Lifjaberg sounds like it was the most relaxing place to spend the afterlife. But how exactly did a Viking get there? The answer is that they had to be invited by Clint herself, which meant that this afterlife was reserved only for the most deserving people. It wasn't enough to simply be a good person in life. A Viking also had to have shown extraordinary kindness towards the gods, usually by building a temple or making a generous donation to a religious festival. Only then would they receive an invitation to spend the afterlife in a place of total luxury and relaxation. History isn't just in the past. It's alive in the stories we choose to remember. Hit the like button, leave a comment with the afterlife that fascinated you most, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of the past.